So good morning from New York City. I would like to start introducing the topic of today's symposium. So this is part of the Center for Blockchain and Economics Research Forum webinars. And today we have a symposium on the topics of non-fungible tokens. And we have three speakers who will discuss different aspects of NFT, ranging from market standards and economics to legal aspects, and also practitioners more applied business perspective views of NFT. So it's like a very interdisciplinary and well complementary set of panelists which will illuminate this topic, and I think it will be extremely informative for those of you who would like to get some exposure to NFT, and for those of you who already know, I think it would be interesting to look at these different aspects together. And before we start with the symposium, I would like to remind briefly the rules of the game. If you have any questions during the talks, please write the questions in the Q&A feature of the webinar, of the Zoom webinar, and I will monitor the Q&A, and I will let you ask the questions depending on time requirements and depending on the relevance of the questions. You are welcome to ask questions at any time, because I've agreed with the panelists that we would like to make this symposium as interactive as possible. So at any time I might interrupt the speaker and let you ask the questions, or in the very worst case, I can let you wait till the end of their interventions to ask the questions. And other than that, I think it's a good time to get started. I would like to introduce the first presenter of this symposium, who is Christophe Spengers. And Christopher already started sharing his slides. So Christophe is an associate professor of finance at HEC Paris, and he will provide an overview of NFT and art markets. And Christophe, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. So you can all hear me well, see my slides, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to talk about NFTs. Most of my research is about transactions in what you could call the traditional art market, but I've really been intrigued by the rapid rise of NFTs in the art world. I'd already been playing around with some data with a few co-authors, but I think preparing this talk was a good motivation for me to do a bit more research and to crystallize my thinking about the topic. So let's get started. So let me maybe take you back to 1970. I'll explain why. This is a certificate that gives you the right to create a particular wall drawing by Soloit, who's famous for his very colorful wall drawings. And so you can create the wall drawing following the instructions and the diagram and call the artwork a Soloit. For a conceptual artist like Lewitt, the true work of art is in the design and the certificate, not whatever is created on the wall. So that also means that if you have a wall on which a Lewitt has been painted, but you no longer have the certificate, that you can no longer call it a Lewitt. You can just as well just erase the drawing or paint white paint over it. Now, fast forward to today, or 2021. This is a digital artwork by an artist called Beeple, digital artist. It's a digital collage. It's a JPEG of 5,000 different small artworks. It's called Every Day is the first 5,000 days. It was sold at Christie's in March for $69 million. Got quite a bit of headlines. Now, what is the relation with the Soloit that I just talked about? Well, actually what the buyer was buying here is not a JPEG itself, which everybody can download, but he's really buying a sort of certificate. He's buying some metadata in this case. So on the left-hand side here, you see the JSON file, the metadata file, which has a description of the artwork and also includes a link to one copy of the JPEG, right? It includes a hash to a copy of the people, right? So this is when NFTs really start getting a lot of attention. So really what was going on here a bit more in a bit more technical detail is that Beeple created a hash or a link to the artwork then created a metadata file that includes a link to the artwork, and then created a link to the metadata file. It's called a hash. It's a cryptographic hash, but you can really think of it as a link. And then he minted a token, which was governed by a smart contract on the blockchain, on the Ethereum blockchain. And what Christie's was really selling here was that token, right? It's created an auction for that token. And so then $69 million were paid for that token. Beeple transferred the token through calling a function within the smart contract to the winner. And apparently it was bought by a cryptocurrency and blockchain entrepreneur and investor who is now taking possession of that token. If this sounds crazy to you, if the $69 million sounds crazy to you, then maybe you should close your eyes for a minute, because this is another recent sale. This is a work called The Pixel, and it's one gray pixel, and it sold for $1.4 million. Again, the owner of the buyer of this lot did not buy the pixel itself, but bought the metadata related to this pixel. So welcome to the nice world, strange world of NFTs. So more generally, how do NFTs work? And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to describe it in sort of most typical or standard scenario. So there's a token that's being created on a blockchain. This is typically the Ethereum blockchain. This token or NFT is called non-fungible because you cannot exchange it like for like with other tokens, like Bitcoins, let's say, or dollars, where $1 is $1. Each NFT is unique and can just have a different market value. So the token is typically issued by a smart contract, which follows a specific NFT standard that allows to create these unique token IDs. And then transfers of the token are initiated by calling functions from within the smart contract. The smart contract will typically refer to metadata associated with a digital object, a digital file. So this is a JSON file typically. So the smart contract can include metadata or refer, most typically it will refer to metadata through a URL or an IPFS hash, which is a way to identify content rather than addresses, right? Because of course the problem with URLs is that they can be broken. And so then that metadata file, which is basically what the buyer is buying, then typically refers to a digital object, a JPEG or something else, again, through a URL or I guess nowadays more typically a hash. And so all transactions related to this token are of course also recorded on the blockchain, right? So what you get here is you do not just get a digital fingerprint of a particular digital object on the blockchain, but you also get an unmodifiable, non-modifiable record of past ownership of the token, right? I think that's sort of at least that's my understanding of how NFTs work. Okay, so let me start with what I think is the easy question, like what are you buying when you buy an NFT? I think what you're buying is you're buying a ledger entry, right? You're buying a line on the blockchain, to put it a bit simplistic. You're buying a ledger entry that refers to a digital object, or at least that refers to the metadata associated with a digital object. Some people would say that you're buying the bragging rights, right? You're buying the right to say that something is yours. Although I'll get back to that question of whether you can really say that the artwork is yours, but you're at least you're buying the right to say that you own the token associated with a certain artwork. You could also say that you're buying a sense of patronage, right? Or you're getting this feeling that you're supporting an artist. And finally, I think what is important is when you have the token, you also have the ability to resell the token, right? So when you're buying a token, you're buying the ability to resell. And that may be important. What you're mostly typically not getting is any other rights related to the artwork, right? So you're not getting the copyright. I think what you're also not getting is a more authentic copy than what other people are getting or what other people can download from the net, right? So sometimes it's said that NFTs allow for collectors to ensure the authenticity of a work, but I'm not sure what that really means, right? Because any copy of the Beeple that I just showed is the same as another copy, right? So it's not that one is more authentic than another. So I wouldn't say that you're necessarily getting a more authentic copy. I think what is true is that through the use of hashes, we can make sure that the content is not modified, maybe, but I wouldn't say that you're getting something that is more authentic than what somebody else is getting. So I think that's the easy question. I think there's a lot of sort of more difficult, almost philosophical questions. I've listed a few here. First one, and maybe we'll get back to that in later talks as well, but can the owner of the NFT call him or herself the owner of the artwork? I would say that the NFT owner is not owning the underlying artwork in any meaningful way, right? Unless we, society, or the art market starts giving that meaning. The NFT owner is owning the token, not the artwork. You cannot sort of take away the artwork from somebody else. It's online for everyone to see and to download. I think another question which always I wonder about is like, why do we necessarily need cryptocurrency, right? So this is typically done on the Ethereum blockchain, and sort of transactions happen in Ether, but you wonder whether there should not be a way to sort of cut that link between having transactions recorded on a blockchain-like system on the one hand, and then having the transactions being payable in cryptocurrency on the other hand. There's a lot of legal questions on what stops people from issuing NFTs on somebody else's creation, and maybe we'll get back to that as well. But there's been cases where people have issued NFTs on other people's pictures or objects. I think the most one of the hardest questions in this whole market is the next one, which is who ensures that in this whole link, if I go back, who ensures that in this link between token and metadata and digital file, that these links sort of survive, right? It's very difficult for you with URLs, but even with hashes, I mean, it's not so clear that these links will continue to exist, right? And to the extent that often the digital object requires a certain platform or a certain software, who ensures that that the digital life of this object continues. There's recently been a bit of interest in the future of the market in NFTs on physical objects, right? So today when we talk about NFTs, we typically talk about NFTs related to digital objects, but there's also experiments with NFTs on physical objects, right? So some tokens allow you to redeem a physical object or are associated with the ownership of a physical asset. There may be some advantages of compared to traditional ways of registering transactions of physical objects, of doing it on the blockchain. But I think this is definitely where we'll see more experiments going forward, right? So where physical objects are transacted and ownership is recorded on a blockchain. The final question I've listed here is that, and this, I guess this is the ever returning question, but of course there's all environmental costs of sort of registering and confirming all these transactions, which I think the art world should think about. So that's sort of some of the questions that I think people have. In terms of the opportunities or the upside of this market, I think what is really neat about this is that if you think about it from an art perspective or art market perspective, is that through the certification of ownership or a form of ownership and this creation of artificial scarcity of something that can be copied and shared freely, this really has enabled the emergence of a market for digital art, right? So now this is good for artists because they can now start monetizing their creations. This is good for collectors or art lovers because they can start putting together collections somehow of digital art or tokens related to digital art. And of course, speculators can speculate. Other nice things about the market is that the new market is arguably relatively transparent compared to the traditional art market. It's also relatively democratic or meritocratic in the sense that it's relatively easy to mint your artwork as an NFT on an exchange. And there's potentially other benefits for artists, right? So these smart contracts that are underpinning the market, they often give a percentage of the resale revenues back to the artists, which is quite nice because historically it has been a criticism of the auction market that the artists themselves don't benefit from the resales. And you can also think of having more things included in these smart contracts that may change the relation between artists and collectors, right? So I think that's there's a lot of opportunities here. When we talk about NFT art, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's very different types of NFT art, right? So the most traditional form is taking a digital artwork and NFTing it. But there's also more native blockchain and crypto art where artists are really experimenting with the medium of blockchain and see what the technological boundaries are or how they can use this as piece of the art itself or as part of the art itself. There's things what we sometimes call crypto collectibles, like these crypto kitties. I've shown an example here, which are virtual cats that you can collect and breed. And back in 2017, trading in crypto kitties almost congested the Ethereum network. So this has been an important market. And I'll show you another example on one of the next slides. But then it goes beyond that, right? There's in games, there's items you can buy and take outside of the gaming environment and sell as an NFT. And there's this whole market for land and buildings and avatars and virtual environments and virtual worlds, which themselves are being minted as NFTs. And then you can take this as far as you want. So the University of Berkeley issued NFTs on patent applications, I think. And so the news of yesterday was that, I don't know if you can see this, but the news of yesterday was that Sotheby's would soon auction the source code written by Tim Berners-Lee for the internet, right? So they're issuing an NFT on the source code of the internet. And so this is quite interesting, right? I mean, I guess it means for us as academics that we can soon NFT our own code and our own papers and have them trade at Sotheby's. I'll NFT this PowerPoint after this. Let me illustrate maybe a bit more the heterogeneity that exists in NFT art. So this is an artwork by Kevin McCoy, which is sometimes called the first NFT, because it was originally minted in 2014 on the Namecoin blockchain. It was reminted recently. So this sold for $1.5 million. And I think this really shows how certain artists are really using the blockchain as part of the art, right? This was initially intended as an experiment with a new medium or a new technology, namely the blockchain. So if you buy this, if you bought this artwork, you also got a lot of additional documentation. You can also look through the contract for this NFT. For example, you can see that the artwork is a data that returns a certain value from a hash function. Such data can be found at a certain URL, but the URL can break. So the artist is not responsible for maintaining access to it. So this is something I mentioned before. There's other things in that contract that are quite interesting. So the ownership of the artwork rests with the owner of the token, and there's always resale royalties that need to be paid to the artist, right? So this is also something I said before, right? So these smart contracts can have these sort of built-in features that are actually quite nice for artists. If you bought this NFT, you also got some screenshots showing how this artwork was initially minted to the blockchain in 2014 already, right? So that probably explains the high price. It's really a piece of history in a sense that it's a sort of potentially the first NFT. The highlight of that same Sotheby's sale was this 24 by 24 pixel punk or CryptoPunk. CryptoPunk 7523, which was one of the 10,000 CryptoPunks that were originally created by two creators called Larva Labs in 2017. These CryptoPunks were initially free to acquire, right? So with anybody with a wallet in 2017. Now this picture or image sold like just now for 11.8 million at Sotheby's, which is, I mean, it's quite amazing, right? I mean, Sotheby's tried to market the sale by saying that this is an alien punk. There's only 9 aliens. This CryptoPunk is also wearing a mask, right? It's one of the few ones wearing a mask, and so they try to make this punk a sign of the times. But I think what's nice about these CryptoPunks, or why they're selling for so much money, is because they've really big be this construction of a community around these CryptoPunks, right? So these punks are often used as avatars. They become part of the identity building of people in the crypto community. And so the fact that there's this large addition of 10,000 punks may also explain why, may have helped in building a community, right? So probably CryptoPunks wouldn't have become important if there were only 10 different punks. But I think it's also interesting because this is really, it's really hard to classify this work, right? Is it an artwork? Is it a collectible? Is it an avatar? Like, what exactly are we looking at, right? It's not obvious. But it sold for $12 million. Now, some of these prices may, of course, be a bit inflated, although it's hard to judge, right? But there's definitely plenty of people who say that that is all part of the meme economy, like Dogecoin or GameStop, and there's definitely a role for crypto wealth and crypto enthusiasm in determining the prices of these works, right? So that being said, however, I also think that innovations like this, financial, technical innovations, are often initially associated with inflated expectations, right? And I think NFTs are not different from other financial innovations we've seen in the past. But so it's clear that sort of people who've become rich in cryptocurrencies, some of them are taking that crypto wealth and sort of putting it in NFTs. That being said, that there's also a lot of what you could call more fundamental determinants of prices. So, I mean, definitely there's a role for the importance of the artist. I think it's important to see that artists like Kevin McCoy, like Bach, these are artists that have been creating digital art for many years, right? So these do not just come out of nowhere. Now, prices are also in a function of the technological innovations, right? So as you could see with some of the things I've shown, and maybe also related to the community that has been built around a certain type of NFTs, right? So I think what makes NFT prices difficult to understand sometimes is that they're very multidimensional. There's many different factors that play a role. That being said, I think it's also important to understand that the auction sales that I've shown are just the tip of the iceberg, right? So these are the multi-million-dollar sales, but most transactions do not happen at auction. Most transactions happen through NFT marketplaces like OpenSea or SuperRare, which have interesting models of transacting, right? Often it's a combination of listing with fixed prices, open offers, reserve auctions, right? Which I think are an interesting concept where a 24-hour auction starts as soon as somebody bids to reserve. And so a lot of the activity in the NFT space is happening at these exchanges. Now, if you analyze the transactions on these exchanges, it's clear that most NFTs are almost worthless, right? So a large majority of NFTs actually sell for less than $10. And according to this recent working paper, only 1% of the NFTs in the past few years sells for more than $1,600. So the $11 million punk is really an outlier in the NFT market. The other thing that is clear through but has become clear through a couple of analysis by different people is that ownership in these markets tend to be highly concentrated. Like a few owners are responsible for a lot of the transactions, or few traders are responsible for a lot of the transactions. A lot of the NFTs are in the hands of a relatively small number of people. And traders tend to be highly specialized in the sense that they typically trade in one class of NFTs, like crypto kitties or crypto punks or something else, and do not easily start trading in other types of NFTs. Okay, so I think what is interesting going forward for this market is the role of auction houses, right? As I said, a lot of the market is concentrated historically on these exchanges, online exchanges, and auction houses have recently become have recently started becoming more important in this market, and that's kind of interesting because, well, first of all, auction houses are expensive, right? So the Beeple that I just showed, Christie's earned a buyer's premium on that sale of $9 million. That was the transaction cost, assuming that there's no kickback from Beeple back to Christie's. To Christie's. And there's arguably a tension between sort of this concept and nature of NFTs, which is like, okay, it's decentralized, it's all a blockchain, and then having the auction houses as an intermediary in this market, right? So when marketing its recent sale, Sotheby's wrote that NFTs are just the latest step in art's emancipation from the wall, and art now flows without mediation. But then on the other hand, they are showing these NFTs on a wall, and of course they are the intermediary. They're putting themselves as an intermediary in this market, right? So I think that this tension between the nature of NFTs or the origins of the NFTs, and then having auction houses intermediate all sort of the most important transactions is interesting. What is clear is that auction houses have reacted fairly quickly to the rise of NFTs, and sort of also made changes in the way they do business, right? So they sell things in the primary market, they hold this week-long online auctions, of course also helped by the pandemic. They're accepting payments in cryptocurrency and so on. I think going forward, what we can definitely expect is that maybe the important role for auction houses in this market is one of a curator, right? So they're providing documentation, they're doing some selection of what they think are important works, they're writing essays. And you have at this stage just less gatekeepers and curators in the NFT market than in the traditional art market. So maybe that's sort of the role that auction houses will start playing going forward. Okay, so some final thoughts. So I think it's clear that the technology is here to stay, even though we might see some excesses right now. It's clear that given the ease of creating NFTs and sort of the infinite pool of digital objects that can be the basis of NFTs, be it tweets or songs or pictures or memes or codes, patent applications, we're likely to see just too much supply, right? So we're likely to see just people trying to take advantage of this demand for NFTs and just minting NFTs like crazy. And so many NFTs today already have very little monetary value, and I guess even more so will lose whatever market value they have very quickly. But you're still going to have this small right tail or this long right tail of items that do have really a technological innovation or artistic quality. I think a real challenge for this market is when the traditional art collectors start buying. I think a lot of the buyers in the recent top sales at the auction houses have been sort of more the crypto crowd, the technological people who made their money in sort of technological innovations and crypto markets. And so the question is, when will more traditional art collectors also start seeing this as a way to diversify their collection? And probably the biggest question of all, most philosophical question is, what meaning will we really give? What meaning will the art market give? What meaning will we give as a society to NFT ownership, right? So do we really consider the owner of a token as the owner of the underlying artwork or not, right? So what does it mean to own an NFT? I think that's probably one of the sort of biggest questions that we'll have to figure out over the next few years. So this is all I had to say for now. I don't know if there's any questions and if we can take them now or...
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. I think there are a few questions. I will let Redigi Jia asking the question. Rizé, I enabled you to speak. You can go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for the talk. I have two questions more on the. So first, it's more like you mentioned auction house, which is for like the intermediary for traditional art market, and there's also galleries. So like I'm just wondering how the intermediaries for NFT art like marketplace are different from those traditional intermediaries, and will the new form of intermediaries help better align the incentive for, let's say, auction house with artists, because there is some rebate from resale, as you just mentioned, and maybe there's also chance to reduce some information asymmetry. And also another question, this is the first question. Second question is more like, can people actually pull multiple NFT together? Because this new tokenization can maybe help people pull the token together, develop some sort of index so that they can diversify the risk of holding only one asset, only one art, and somehow improve the liquidity. And this may attract more investor compared to the traditional art market.
Yeah, so let me start with the second question. So I think we're definitely going to see experiments in terms of securitization, tranching, pooling. Even the buyer of the Beeple that I showed at the beginning already announced at some point, well, maybe I'm just going to cut it up in different pieces and tokenize. I mean, so I think we're definitely going to see experiments with that, right? So also you can think of creating a token on the pool of art. So I think this is definitely where we'll see more experiments. And I think that's interesting also because these offline experiments have not been super successful, right? So art investment funds, for example, there's lots of frictions and problems, and they've not been super successful. So maybe this tokenization will help in really creating this access to art as an asset class. Regarding to the first question, there is a small sort of niche market already of galleries, for example, that specialize in digital art. There's also a fair next week or this week in Paris specialized on digital art. And I think so, but these tend to be different from sort of the big galleries that you tend to be able to visit at the biggest fairs or in the biggest cities. I think that the question of whether NFTs will sort of help aligning incentives between different intermediaries, I think that's a very interesting question, right? I think it's true that up to now, for example, reselling at auction was not always in the best interest of an artist, because in any case, the artist was not benefiting from it, and this may create volatility in the market. And so maybe NFTs might help align, or I mean, the usage of smart contracts might help align artists with intermediaries, right? Also because when the artist initially sort of issuing the smart contract or the token, then he or she can already build in things that he or she thinks are important going forward, right? While the problem with the traditional art market is once an artist sells the artwork, it's sort of out of control, right? So then, so I think it's an interesting question, right? So whether there will be alignment of incentives.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Rizé. Thank you, Christoph. There is another question from Hussein Kazemi. I will enable you to speak. Yeah. Please, Hussein, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, there's some evidence that crypto enthusiasts tend to diversify their gains from one currency into others to have a diversified portfolio without going to the fiat currency, basically markets. Is this sort of another way for them to diversify, or is it really art enthusiasts who are buying these NFTs?
No, I think what is clear is that a lot of the high-profile purchases have been by crypto enthusiasts, right? So it's also, I mean, maybe in some sense, it's also a way of promoting the markets, right? So if you look at the buyers in some of these sales, these are definitely people that either are professionally engaged in the crypto world, the blockchain world, or have made money and through crypto blockchain funds. So to some extent, this may be a way to diversify for them, right? Because it's clear that NFT prices may have a link with cryptocurrency prices, right? Because given the importance of the Ethereum blockchain here, the price of Ether may be somehow, I mean, related to the price of NFTs, but it will not be a perfect correlation, right? So I can imagine that it's a form of diversification without sort of having to say that you've left or you've left the crypto world, right? But I think it's kind of so for me, it's really one of the difficult questions, or one of the questions about this market, right? So I think the NFTs have a lot of offer a lot of possibilities, and they really solve a real business problem, right? So by but this link, why there's necessarily this link with cryptocurrency, that's not so obvious, right? So why can we not have something like this in dollars, let's say?
Thank you.
Thank you. So just the time for another question, and then we can delegate, postpone the remaining questions.
Yeah, I can see the, maybe
I
can see the question. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask. I think Jose, and then question of Anna, we can postpone it to the end, just in the interest of time. Jose, you should be able to speak now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I was broadly, I was thinking, what are the characteristics of items on which you can have an NFT? I was thinking, for example, expensive bottles of wine. I understand many times they're never consumed. The wine just goes bad in the bottle, but kept in a precious manner by collectors and traded among each other. So in a way, the consumptible part is not important. It is unique history and exactly what Wine Village comes from, who was the producer, and all that sort of thing. And maybe, I don't know what you think of it.
I mean, I think the wine market is definitely a place where, if I remember correctly, that we already see sort of experiments with NFTs, because the problem with expensive wine is that provenance, or the history of ownership, is super important, right? And so you can sort of, when the wine is being created at the chateau, you can issue an NFT or a smart contract that automatically links to metadata related to when the wine was bottled, how it has been stored, and so on. So you can have a lot of data automatically being fed to the blockchain, let's say. And then later on, also the transactions can be automatically recorded. So when people talk about NFTs on physical objects, people really think about something like diamonds, expensive bottles of wine.
Real estate? What about real estate?
Real estate, yeah. So people talk about real estate. Now, of course, with real estate, the problem is probably that there's this whole industry and sort of notaries and government
regulation.
But in theory, at least, indeed, this idea of smart contracts and having, I mean, there's this whole industry on prop tech as well, right? I mean, there's definitely people playing around with this idea of like, why not having this on, I mean, I'm not saying that you really want to have the token being traded on an exchange for your house, right? But at least this idea of recording ownership and transactions, and then maybe linking to other metadata related to your house on the blockchain in a non-modifiable way, that's definitely something that people are exploring.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jose, and thanks, Christoph, for answering. So in the interest of time, I would like to move on with the next talk, and then Hannah will be able to ask the question at the end. So the next speaker is Professor George Fairfield, who is like a chair professor at Washington and Lee University, and is an expert in legal aspects of financial technology, and he will be speaking about that in the context of NFT. Please, Josh, go ahead, share the slides.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, well,
great.
Very well, thank you.
So I'm going to pick up on the last word that Christoph mentioned, which is ownership. And thanks very much, Agostino, and thanks to our hosts for having us here today, and thanks to all of you who are listening for joining in. I think that we've got a good flow here, right? Because Christoph is going to give us the killer app that's been grabbing a lot of the headlines recently. I'll give the legal framework and something of the history and the path of ownership of digital assets, and why our current situation is both an outgrowth of where we've been and really something new and something that's going to show some path breaking in the law. And then we'll move on to Nitin, who's going to talk about some of the different business models that are available as a result of this evolving understanding of the value of digital uniqueness, of the value of digitally unique items, and then the new financial markets that they make possible. So I am, as Agostino mentioned, a chair professor at Washington Lee University School of Law. I have been studying digital ownership for about 20 years now. And some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, you'll see in a book that just came out from Cambridge University Tech called Runaway Technology, which has to do with how law keeps up with. So how do we take the old law of property and extend it to new circumstances like cryptocurrencies and NFTs. And if you're interested in the question of digital ownership in particular, then there's another book from Cambridge University Press called Owned 2017 that deals specifically with the evolution and development of digital personal property, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to pick up Christophe's question. What do we own when we buy a non-fungible token? And I'm going to do two things with Christophe's question. The first is to reiterate the bundling together of a bunch of very disparate assets. If you'll remember some of Christophe's slides, talking about right there's assets from the art itself, which is created by the artist or might be taken as a picture of the real world, right? Really anything, any set of data that can be dumped into an entry screen can be hashed under a hash algorithm, under a secured hash algorithm, and you can get a unique numerical output for it. So if you want to play with this sometime, you can simply pull up one of the websites that deals with SHA-256 and dump any string that you want. You can dump the Gettysburg Address, you can dump hello world, you can dump a picture, anything that is reducible to digits you can put into that, and you're going to get a unique finite string that comes out of it. All right, so we've got the art, then we've got the hash of that art. We can take the art, put it into that box, and get out a unique numerical string that is uniquely related to the artwork. And that we can then hash as a token to a decentralized ledger of people's interests, a blockchain, for example. Of course, none of this, and a lot of what I'll be talking about is, none of this requires a decentralized ledger. We've had our first cut at digital item ownership, and some of the problems with it had to do with centralized ledgers. So you might think, for example, of the ledger talking about somebody's very valuable magical sword within World of Warcraft, or you might consider someone's unique ship within No Man's Sky, or back in the day within EVE Online, or you might consider things like your bank account, right, which is a cryptographically secured list of digits secured by a central authority. So we've got the art, the hash, the token. We've got the smart contract, which is itself both an automated process, a program for transferring the tokens from one person to another, and usually under the EC 721 standard, which is the Ethereum standard for maintaining these tokens. It's going to be a registry of all the tokens created by a given minter, by a given person who's created those tokens. All right. We've also got bragging rights, and we've got the social community that surrounds the assets. So if we think about, for example, an application like Top Shots, which turns particularly good basket moments in basketball, particularly good shots in basketball, we take those GIFs, we take those clips, and we digitize them, we hash them, we create a unique digital token for them, and we sell them, right? So that is a community that values the ownership, that values the bragging rights within the asset. And we take all those things and we staple them more or less loosely together. And we call that owning an NFT or owning an object. Now, I'm going to basically say two things. First, which is that loose stapling together of things is actually exactly what we do when we talk about owning something in real life anyway. Right? So think about your home, think about something that you own, think about a car, right? we could compartmentalize it. We could split it up. If you buy a Tesla, for example, you may well own the physical car, but you certainly don't own the intellectual property rights in the IP that makes the thing run. And so we've already begun to slice up ownership in different ways in the real world in a way that reflects this loose assemblage of rights stapled together that we've been talking about. And so the place where I'm going to go from Christoph's point and launch from there is to say we are developing an idea of digital ownership. It is inevitable. The amount of money and the amount of interest for more than 2 decades on the internet is far too much for digital uniqueness not to catch fire. What's instead going to happen is that law will have to find a way of hammering out protection for these rights. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, the problems with that. All right, so what's the problem? The problem is that online, with this question of digital ownership, and here I'd like you to keep the following example fixed in your mind. Do you or do you not own the movies, books, and music that you have purchased online, say an Amazon Kindle ebook, right, or an MP3 from Apple's iTunes? And the answer is absolutely not. And what went wrong is the question, right? Because we are now celebrating over 30 years in the wrong direction online. The amount of money and interest, the natural upflowing of these markets in non-fungible tokens, in unique digital assets of all kinds, and non-fungible tokens are really the latest in a series. Now, they are new technology, but they are not the first to capture this need to collect, this need to own. Ask the video game industry, right? They've been busy selling skins and unique objects as their primary way of gathering money for, I'd say, the better part of 10 years now, as the entire industry has shifted away from subscription models to these item purchase models. People value this stuff enormously. The interest has been growing. There's been this upswell of interest in ownership. It is a fundamental human need to collect and own things that are unique and rare. However, our legal structure has gone exactly the wrong way for a very long time. And so to do a U-turn, we need to know where we've been and what's coming next. All right, so here's the fundamental issue. If you take a look at a painting, we've got 2 sets of rights that law naturally comes to. And already this is a bit of a negotiation, right? So if you see a painting on the wall, you might easily be able to differentiate between ownership in the object and ownership in the intellectual property that went into the object. So if you look at the painting, for example, here that I've displayed on the screen, you can imagine that there would be an object on the wall, and you can also imagine that the artist retains the right to make infinite future copies. That's the big one, so that the artist can maintain her ability to make a living. What she needs to be able to do is stop other people from making infinite copies of the thing in order to preserve the rivalrousness, uniqueness of the copies that she does sell. And to do that, then offline, we've got this simple hack, which is we say the physical part is belongs to the person who owns it. The intellectual property part belongs to the person who created it, unless they otherwise license it out. And we use 2 very different legal systems to transfer interest. We use an interest of sale, buying, and ownership for the physical object, but we use a legal regime of licensing and contract for the intellectual property licenses. And it's those 2 legal regimes that have come into fierce conflict over the past 30 years or so online, and that are really coming to a head when we talk about, do you truly own an NFT? What do you own after you've put down $69 million for something that anybody can make a copy of by simply right-clicking and saying save image as? What is it that you've got here? And it's that divide that law began to grapple with when we moved everything online. So there are 2 problems with online copies. The first is copies, the second is locks. So the first problem is that of copies. Computers operate exclusively by making copies. So if I transfer a file to you, what happens really is that my computer sends you packets that you reassemble as a file that is a copy of the original file that I had. And there's no reason why I can't keep a copy of the file and send it to you as well. So although the internet began to scare intellectual property rights holders, here I'm referring back to, say, the Napster era, right? BearShare, LimeWire. I know I'm dating myself. These were all responses by the intellectual property holding industry to the fact that people were making full copies of movies and music and were distributing them without paying for them in copyright infringement across the web. But the problem was that it's not just users who are digital pirates who make copies. Anyone who uses a computer for anything at all makes a copy. And this is a really important thing for us to understand. It is one of the major problems in the legal regime underneath NFTs. And that is, I'm going to show you in a moment that the licenses that deal with NFTs are functionally the same as the licenses that handle your ownership of Amazon Kindle ebooks or music, and that they retain for the creator of the NFT the right to make copies of the artwork. And if they do that, it prevents you from doing the fundamental thing that people think that they can do with an NFT, which is invest in it and sell it to somebody else, transfer it. And what I want you to see from this slide is all transferring is copying. That's simply how the internet worked. The law wasn't ready for that. And so the law has made some deep mistakes in calling all use of a computer copying. I'll reach that question in that case called MAI systems versus peak computing in a moment. Here it is. So MAI is a case we don't need to go into great detail. It was an early 1990s case. What happened was in that case that a manufacturer of computing equipment wanted to control the aftermarket for repairs. They wanted to keep other people from servicing their computers. And so what they said was, they had a very innovative theory of the case. What they said was, every time a repair person who doesn't come from our company turns a computer on, they make a copy of the operating system from ROM into RAM, from read-only memory into random access memory. And that copy is making an unlicensed copy. It must be made in accordance with the license. And so if the repair person even turns on the computer in order to repair it, they are committing copyright infringement. Now and the court agreed. That outcome is so profoundly stupid that Congress immediately changed it in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and said, no. In fact, computer repairs as we know it can continue. But the underlying holding, which is every use of a computer is making a copy, that remained the case. And that's why, for example, every time if you buy and fully pay for software, movies, music, Kindle ebooks, that every time you log into them, you have to be following the terms and conditions of the license, or you're creating copyright infringement because your computer is making a copy. And it's the same thing with NFTs. Even if I own an NFT, every time I display it on the wall in a virtual museum, if I transfer it to someone else, if I even turn on my computer and look at it, I am making a copy of it, and I must be making that copy of it in accordance with the license of the intellectual property, or I am committing copyright infringement. That basic structure of forcing license into the middle of ownership then is the core Achilles heel at the center of the legal framework surrounding NFTs. All right, what do we do about the copying problem? Well, so what Congress thought they would do is this. They would put locks on intellectual property, and then they would make it a federal civil offense, as well as, by the way, a criminal offense under some circumstances, to break that lock off. Now, what that means is that even if you buy something, it didn't do much to stop piracy. What it was supposed to do was stop people from copying DVDs, for example. And it didn't work for a split second because hackers don't give a crap. And so hackers immediately said, yeah, cool law, we just don't care at all, and immediately break the copyright protection. But what really happened was, even if you fully own something digital, breaking digital locks off of it then became a sanctionable offense under DMCA section 1201. And what that means is that for the first time, companies were able to put terms and conditions in their license agreements. And if you agreed to their terms and conditions, then your use of what you had fully bought and paid for was constrained. Go take a look at your iTunes license, for example, if you want to feel bad about this. And if you bypass that license, then this is the weird move. Courts said contracts are like these digital locks. They shouldn't have said that either, but we're going through a whole bunch of cases where they shouldn't have said that. Then if you bypass those contracts and you don't give up all of your legal rights, then you have committed an offense under DMCA section 1201. So smashing a digital lock that somebody else put on your property then is sanctionable under section 1201. It didn't do what it set out to do. It didn't stop online piracy at all. What it did do was lock most of us out of digital assets that we fully paid for and own. And so we got the aftermath of online piracy, which is that smashing digital locks off of your own property, including bypassing or otherwise not following the license contracts that control what you can do with fully bought and paid for digital property, became a sanctionable offense under 17 U.S.C. section 1201. What this meant is then that the legal regime surrounding digital assets is not a legal regime around property. We don't own digital assets online like we own physical objects offline. Physical objects we own offline, it's essentially a statement, this is mine, this is a resource that I can fully make use of, and I don't have to ask anyone's permission to do it, and I don't have to ask how I can use it. For example, if I buy a copy of artwork online, and yes, I understand that there are different intellectual property regimes, so what I'm going to describe here, for example, may transgress against moral rights within the European Union framework. But if I buy a painting and I own the physical object, I can sell it. I don't have to ask anyone. I can display it wherever I want to. I don't have to ask anyone. I can destroy it if I want to. I don't have to ask anyone. To make infinite further copies of it, yes, that I have to license. But all of the things that you can do as the owner of an object, you don't have to say, "Mother, may I?" You don't have to go to anyone else and follow their license conditions or be channeled by the digital locks that they've put on the asset. And you can see this easily enough. So consider a digital asset that means something to you. Maybe it's your iTunes, maybe it's a subscription in Hulu, maybe it's a magical sword within a role-playing game, maybe it's digital currency that you've collected within a game. If you go and look at the end-user license agreements for each of those games or those situations, what you'll find is statements that you don't own the underlying asset at all. You merely license it, and you license it under quite constrained conditions. All right, so here's a little bit of this language. This is from Amazon Kindle. You may not sell, rent, lease, distribute, broadcast, sublicense, or otherwise assign any rights to the digital content or any portion of it to third party. That is, you don't own what you buy through a Kindle. Fine. World of Warcraft, the same thing. The following components of the platform are owned or licensed by Blizzard. All virtual content appearing within the platform, including items. And in my earlier research, I did a lot of work on digital ownership within games like this, where people were paying enormous amounts of money, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for these virtual items, but had no legal protectable interest in them. And my point today is that can't be how the NFT market goes forward, because people are being given the expectation of ownership in these assets. People are using the word own. They're using the word buy and sell. Those are words with legal meaning. And so the law is going to have to shift to give full protection to these kinds of assets. And indeed, up until this past several years, markets and digital assets have had a really rough time. So a company called Redigi, for example, wanted to permit people to sell their used MP3s. And what they wanted, when you were done with Britney Spears' Toxic, you could sell it on to the next person. And what they did was they said, look, you're going to upload it. And as you upload it, it's deleted off of your computer. And then when the other person downloads it, it's deleted off of the server. So there's only one copy at any one time. And the court said exactly what I said in the beginning, which is, even though the original copies are deleted and there's only ever one copy at one time, still the computer functions by copying. So the transfer process itself involves the copyright that is owned by the creator of the asset. And if the transfer process itself is owned by the copyright creator, then what happens is you can't transfer. We can't have markets. Okay, so now we've got these two things. We have this enormous upswelling, rising interest in ownership in digital assets. It's actually not new. It's been going on for 2 to 3 decades. And we've got markets that are emerging in these assets. And the question is, will NFT markets face the same fate as other markets in digital assets have before? Are they going to wreck on the rocks of intellectual property licensing? And the answer so far seems to be, yeah. I have to say, if I were talking to people who were investing in NFTs, I'd say, don't do it now. Or if you did, take a long look at the license. Because I've done a look at a number of these licenses. I chose the Nifty license. This is used for the CryptoKitties that Christophe was talking about earlier, but it's largely the same language. Frankly, they've taken the same language from intellectual property licenses generally. And so you'll find similar language on Super Rare and Rarible. You'll find the same language that's put out for most of these auction house sales. You'll find the same language for Gods Unchained, which is a collectible card trading game that is linked to NFTs. It's always going to be the same language. And here it is, you acknowledge that they own all legal right, title, and interest in the art and all intellectual property rights therein. Now that sounds fine, right? The buyer owns the token, the creator continues to own the intellectual property, but that's never been the deal within the offline world. I own one copy of the art that I buy and I can display it. And if it's the definitive copy, I can put it in a museum. I can charge to have people come and see it, among other things. And what also has gone completely under the radar is that the complete reservation of all of these intellectual property rights includes a sneaky reservation of the right to transfer. That has not been made clear, that copying, that transfer online is copying. And so that the basic right that an NFT holder claims that they have, they can transfer the token, but they're not able to grant any serious right to transfer anything with respect to the art itself. And that's simply going to have to change. People are not spending millions of dollars of this on these things in order to get no legal rights at all. And so, for example, when we get limits like this, where you get, what can you do? Well, you've got this non-exclusive, so they can give it to other people, non-transferable, royalty-free license. That's exactly what you get in the intellectual property, is this license to use, copy, and display the art for your purchased NFTs for your personal non-commercial use. And some of these licenses even put, we'll let you make a little bit of profit on these NFTs, maybe up to $100,000 or so. That's in some of the licenses. And if you're thinking about people who are investing in the $1 million range, then you can immediately see how these kinds of restrictions make ownership in an NFT an extremely dodgy question. And we're going to have to do something about it. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? Well, there are a few basic moves. I do think that the future here is hopeful. And that is, and why do I think that? Because technologists are too prone to focus on the affordances, the actual features of technology. What they don't tend to do when they're asking questions of law is ask how the humans use the asset. I'll give you an example. So there's a lot of confusion around regulation of cryptocurrencies in general. Are they commodities? Are they currencies? Are they records? Right? How do we treat them? Are they securities? And the answer turns out to be wildly simple. Pay no attention to the technology. We're using the identical decentralized ledger technology for all of them. What matters is how the humans are using it. So if I'm using it to buy cups of coffee, then it's a currency. If I'm using it to sell to people to get money to build my business from the ground up, then it's a security. If I'm holding it as an asset, then it is a commodity, and so on and so forth. The relevant question for law has almost nothing to do with technology, and this is something that technologists have a hard time with. They want to tell us what the technology really is, rather than asking how the humans are using it. And it doesn't matter to a lawyer, right? So if I commit murder by rock or by sword or by gun or by lightsaber or by hacking somebody's pacemaker, it's still murder. Law doesn't care. So the one thing that we've got to do then is look at how humans are passing on these valuable assets and what is being told to the humans, what are the representations that are being made, and then what are the shifts in law that are going to accommodate, and they will accommodate, these emerging kinds of digital personal property ownership rights. All right, there's a few things that we're going to have to do here, and then I'll end my conversation. I've got about 2 minutes to go. The first is duplication rights. It's simply going to have to change. The people who are writing the licenses for NFTs have not yet figured out, they didn't do their homework. It's a crying shame But they have not yet figured out that you cannot transfer an NFT, or at least you cannot transfer its relationship with the intellectual property. You cannot transfer the right to view that artwork you just purchased for $69 million by virtue of transfer of the NFT, unless we make some changes in the licenses. Because these absolute reservations of the right to transfer invoke what's called the RAM copy doctrine, which is out of MAI, which we talked about, and that is that any use of a computer to transfer a digital asset involves copying the digital asset. And that includes even if you transfer the token from one person to another, and then they download the JPEG or the GIF from a different source. It's the same problem. Still, transfer involves copying. And we're just simply going to have to fix those in the licenses. The second thing that we're going to have to do is develop a concept of digital personal property. This is easier than it sounds like, although up until now, courts have been steadfast that you don't own your Kindle ebooks, or that you don't own your Hulu, or you don't own the movies that you've downloaded. What they have done is where assets are unique and rivalrous, say, for example, a domain name, then we have begun to use property law, not contract law, to govern its transfer. And property law comes with a set of rights like the right to transfer, the right to exclude others from use, the right to use it yourself, even in some circumstances, the right to destroy, which we would say in the NFT context would be the right to burn the token by assigning it to an address that cryptographically has no key to retrieve it. That would burn the token permanently. So what we're going to do is see the evolution from contract law. Instead of dealing with all of this by license, we're going to use the law that we use when we regularly buy and sell things in the real world. The third thing we're going to do is there's a bunch of doctrines within copyright law. One of them, for example, is the essential step doctrine. We don't have time now to go into it in detail. Long ago, Congress said, oh yeah, if you own software, you have the right to make a copy of it to back it up or to otherwise use it to turn it on without involving copyright infringement. And courts wrote that more or less out of the law by saying, oh yeah, but nobody owns digital assets anyway. So sure, if you own it, then you have the right to back it up. You have the right to turn on your computer and use it as an essential step to making use of it. But nobody owns anything online. And so a lot of those doctrines are available in law to protect the personal property rights of purchasers and owners of NFTs. Once the court realizes, no, people were really sold this. They didn't license it. They were truly sold an asset that was stapled together. Sure, I don't own the copyright, for example, to a painting, but I do own the painting and I do own the group of rights around it. And then the last thing, and I think this is by far the most important when it comes to law, is that the amount of money and the amount of interest involved will finally crack that barrier. Amazon, Blizzard Entertainment, World of Warcraft, Apple for iTunes, right? The big players in this space have been very, very careful to continue to only let people access digital assets under a license schematic, and that's because they're worried about rampant copying. But remember that one of the things that tokenization solves, it doesn't solve the problem that anybody can make a copy of the Beeple every day's first 5,000 days NFT, or at least the art of it, but you can't copy the entire bundle itself, right? You can have signed and verified and verifiable ownership of the asset. You can have a registry server that checks to say, hey, does this person own this? Well, here's the list of people who do own it in the decentralized ledger. And so you can verify ownership in a way that we can have mirror real life ownership. And remember, somebody can make a copy of the Mona Lisa anytime. We can all take a digital photograph of it if we can escape the guards at the Louvre. And we can hand that digital photograph off to whomever we want, but that doesn't destroy the desire to own the original, the desire to own something that's been designated by a community as unique, as rare, as collectible. And so once we are trading on those expectations and selling people assets based on those expectations, I guarantee that the law will follow those expectations. It's simply a matter of time. All right, that's where I'm going to leave my talk today, and I look forward to any questions you have, and we can also move on from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh, for a very interesting presentation. Maybe we have time for a quick question. And of course, there is always a possibility to ask questions at the very end. But just one quick question, Josh, and that I have for you. you spoke about like digital uniqueness. I'm thinking, can you comment on what would be, how do you see the market grow or develop in light of the fact that the regulations are not ready yet? I mean, do you expect this to be taking off in the next year or so, or do you think it's more a longer term process?
Well, first of all, I think that the present NFT focus is one step in a long-standing development of ownership in digital rights. This is no different in substance from the trading markets in digital gold or in other assets that have been not protected by legal rights up until now. And so what we ought to expect is that the interest in this will continue to grow. Now, what the social communities are that value these assets, that's going to change. If we take a look at Top Shot, it's people who are really interested in basketball moments. If we take a look at Gods Unchained, it's going to be the collectible trading card group. If we take a look at ownerships of stocks and bonds that are put onto a decentralized blockchain, it will be people who value, say, GMC, which as a meme stock you might agree with, you might not, or it might be IBM, which everybody thinks is blue chip, right? So the community determines the value. What I can't tell you is what a community will value. What I can tell you is that communities will value certain unique items, and that when they do so, the technology has now been evolved in order to designate, track, and manage the provenance of those items. And furthermore, I can also say that the law isn't there yet that won't stop these markets from taking off. It will prevent them from becoming fully mature markets, because in the end of the day, right, here's an easy one. Let's say I steal the 5,000 days. I can steal it. I can hack somebody's wallet. I can guess a password. So can you. And if I can get somebody's password, compromise, just compromise the human, and then transfer the token. Now I've got it. It's on the blockchain. But unfortunately, I've headed out. Nobody can get a hold of me. Well, so if somebody steals my car and the police find it by the side of the road, a court can assign the car back to me, can hand it right back, and can redo the deed, can convey the legal ownership of it back to me. If somebody forges a deed to my house, then the court can order a new deed issued. Right? But that's going to be quite difficult under these circumstances where somebody has taken it, has transferred it. We know that if the person is findable, a court will try to act as if it's any other kind of property. They'll order the property returned. But what happens, for example, if they don't? Are they going to order the creator to issue a new, truly legitimate NFT to the legal owner of this? We don't even have the beginning of an understanding how law is going to work out the details of even such a simple thing as theft. But what we know is that they're going to do it. We're not going to simply treat this as a license, such that if somebody steals, say, a copy, for example, of software that's on my computer, I don't really have any legal rights against them at all. Sure, they copied, I don't know, Microsoft Word off of my computer. Well, fine, they copied Microsoft Word. They haven't harmed me in any way. They just made another copy. Microsoft might be angry with them, but not me. And I can promise you, between those two legal frameworks, we're going to move forward with the property framework, not this licensing regime framework. Anyway, good question.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, let's move on to the next talk. Will be delivered by Nitin Gaur. And Nitin is the director of the Digital Assets Lab at IBM, and he has been working extensively on digital finance, like tokenization, decentralized finance, and NFT. And yeah, he will, I'm sure he will provide a very interesting business perspective. Nitin, please
thank
go
you.
ahead.
You can hear me, right?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. And again, I think, I'm going to talk about now the business of NFT and digital assets. Christoph, of course, presented an extensive view of how they are created. Josh, of course, covered in terms of the legal ramifications of what a digital asset is and some of the challenges that skirt around this truly element of things that we value in terms of digital sense. I'm going to spend some time in sort of looking into the history of why blockchain came. So the notion of trade, trust, ownership become sort of the fundamental tenets of blockchain. And that sort of intersects with something Josh mentioned in terms of, okay, fine, I'm dealing with trading a digital asset, and in many cases, we've tried to digitize the bankable assets, the stocks and the bonds and things that we value, including the notion of stable coins, which sort of are token denomination for fiat, the money that we hold in our wallets, and sort of looking into sort of creating cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, which we derive as a belief system in the community of what it, what value it derives. So those things are compared oftentimes to our existing financial system. And it's a well-treaded path to say, you know what, there's a collateral aspect to it, there's an interest aspect to it, there's borrowing and lending and all the constructs that we have become familiar over time. What is interesting with NFTs and bringing NFT to life is non-bankable assets. These are things that we truly value. And I think Christoph mentioned, again, some of the examples he gave us arts and collectibles. But in many cases, the work that I have done with clients, we begin to look digital ID as a non-fungible asset. It's unique, it belongs to you, it's not exactly fungible, but it has value. It has value to you because that becomes sort of a primary verification validation instrument for you to transact digitally, and it can be misused if not kept safe. And then you also have the element of other non-bankable asset, your healthcare record. Today, many of us sort of, we go to doctors and physicians. We don't really own our data. It's owned by the massive ecosystem that's the healthcare information system providers and healthcare, the ecosystem that drives it. It really owns the data. But imagine if you could own the lineage of your entire healthcare history. Not only you could go into customized medicine, but you can also lend that data to clinical research and going after additional research areas and insurance areas. And so we begin to look into NFTs as not just what has been in the media today and the hype of the Beeples of the world, but we're looking at truly in terms of practicality of using what we truly value, which the banks and financial institutions don't really have a mechanism to drive and quantify and provide the risk model around those values. And nonetheless, there's tremendous amount of value in some of the things that we have, real estate, arts, patents, for example, and ability for me to fractionalize. For example, if I do want to refinance my house, I can take my house and create sort of fractional element of those houses and be able to raise funds. And if I can do that for a house, can I not do that for my potential earnings from my healthcare record, my potential earnings from my patents that I own, the cars that I own, and so on and so forth. So I think we begin to look at a much expanded perspective of digital assets. And in many cases, they intersect with what Josh was mentioning earlier is, are they truly digital? And in some cases they are, but in some cases they sort of are tokenized or asset tokenization technology that have been sort of ramping up, or tokenized form of a physical asset that may be in your house. And so how do you sort of provide the provenance and provide the integrity of that asset? So non-bankable asset to me, that class is completely untapped. And I'll give you an example in a few minutes in terms of where we see the asset classes. And one challenge about presenting in a blockchain context is these numbers sort of go in and out in 1 week or 2 weeks. So your slides become outdated because of the massive fluctuation and the valuation of these technologies. But if you look at Bitcoin, we compare that with gold, digital gold, in terms of a hedge protection, hedge against inflation. But you also look at equities and real estate. So collectively, the overall valuation of bankable assets is somewhere around $417 trillion or so. And that is something which is quantified. Banks understand this in the balance sheets and the books. But the bigger market which NFT presents is around 600 to 1.2 quadrillion dollars worth. These are things that are not exactly in the mainstream financial systems. And I think the example that was cited earlier with Beeple and Top Shots and some of the arts, including the baseball cards that have their own little market and secondary markets that go with it, all that is not really captured in the financial system. And we see that massive valuation, which is exponentially higher than the traditional sort of financial ecosystem. So the question then becomes, how do we make money from it? What is the business of NFTs? What is the business behind digital assets that is incumbent? So I would like to sort of take a page from, and I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth only to make a point in terms of what we are seeing, is taking a page from how internet evolved. And I always go back to this because internet almost took us 12 to 13 years since its evolution, before we were able to do more than simply view websites. And again, I'm dating myself here, but early days when you had protocols, you had TCP/IP, we began to start doing some basic level communication between computers. And then came HTTP and browser, and we were able to then simply disseminate information. And at the end of the day, we realized that these protocols were really designed for information dissemination. And then came HTTPS, TLS, and other security protocols. And we were comfortable then buying airline tickets and banking and so on and so forth. And I think, the old adage of what internet has done for information, we expect blockchain to do that thing for things of value. I oftentimes equate that protocol evolution and how these are monetized. What is the business behind these protocols, comparing to what internet has come forth. So if you recall back in the day, and again, I'm dating myself, I was in college when all this happened, there was this massive valuation of companies that came with compression algorithms. You had to pay to have an email account with entities like AOL, who also provided you a gateway to internet. And so you had all these economics built into these models, but over time they evolved. Over time, you practically don't pay for many of these lower level protocol services because they're either baked into some sort of a service, for example, creating a network effect, and which is a hallmark of many blockchain ecosystems. And the network effect, like Google's of the world and Amazon's of the world, allowed you to capitalize on understanding consumers, providing ad revenue and providing better customized services, and thereby subsidizing the lower level protocols. We begin to see similar trends in the blockchain world, and I'll connect this to NFT in a minute. But we look into who are the protocols that are supporting these NFT and growing ecosystems. So of course you have the Ethereum and the Bitcoin and all the Ethereum competitors who are providing smart contract or vehicles, allowing us to provide that ecosystem that deals with creation of token, non-fungible token or a fungible token, transacting with that token, and eventually keeping the token safe or custody of the token, whether you're having that custody in a wallet or a third party providing some guarantees and so on and so forth. And then you have layer 2 protocol that basically says, layer 1 is inefficient, it's slow. We need to have and there's a whole economic model revolving around layer 2 where things become interesting. And my focus is who are the Amazons of the next world. And what you see with Dapper Labs and the Flow protocols are trying to create that internet layer elements. But there's a marketplace. There's a primary marketplace where you can create and commercialize these tokens. So to me, my focus is layer 4. Layer 4 makes us all make sense of these underlying layers. But at the same time, it took us almost 25 to 30 years for Amazon to be an icon, and Baidu and the global force of truly using internet to obfuscate and hide the back office systems of connecting the ERP and supply chain and you getting your shipment the very next day. I think that in many cases, we begin to sort of envision that world where NFTs, which will truly revolutionize the killer app that we have been talking about for almost a decade in the blockchain world, is coming to life. I think DeFi is interesting, and there is a comparison to what we have seen with DeFi is applying that layer, the same layering in terms of the business of protocols and how protocols are monetized, is the same way. And if I were to sort of go back in time, the way you commercialize these protocols are either you're relying upon a token-based model, which is paying for a transaction for every time you transact. That way you don't have to maintain these massive systems and there's an incentive mechanism there, or using token as a medium of exchange, that if I'm exchanging an NFT, I need something in return, and the return could be a stable coin that denotes USD or any other local denomination in currencies, or it could be a Bitcoin and Ether, which is equally liquid in the cryptosphere that we operate in. Or you could go into asset pair trading to say, hey, I'm pledging my NFT because I need to monetize this, or I need to lend against NFT, which practically is a hard thing. You can't go to a bank and give your obscure artist painting and say, hey, I need to mortgage this or collateralize this for lending. And banks really don't have the apparatus, but the digital world does. Right? The recent work that Aave as a platform has allowed you to basically use your NFT as collateralized asset and lend against and borrow against it, I think is a testament of where this industry is heading. And not to mention commercialization of protocols, which is what Dapper Labs, the Flow protocol, is trying to do, is commercialize the protocol. So you begin to see that commercial system, echoing and sort of, trying to fight the system which Josh described, to say, how do we ascertain the true sense of digital ownership of these assets, which is either tied to your wallet, and then using many of the frameworks around the element of Web 3.0 and decentralized technologies to keep highly available, safe, and live forever, which is sort of the ethos of many of the blockchains or ecosystems. And again, if I compare the DeFi stack, you see an emerging NFT stack, which looks similar to these things. I mean, if you look at DeFi stack, again, reliant on layer one for providing basic settlement, that I need to have some asset as an exchange mechanism because NFT themselves are non-fungible. So you need a fungible asset to exchange these things. And then you look into the true financial innovation, you begin to find new protocols, liquid derivatives, the collateralized debt positions, decentralized exchanges. These things didn't exist 4 years back. And the reason why I find it exciting is that while finance may be not everyone's cup of tea, and it's for very select few and we're trying to democratize it, to me, NFTs are everybody's cup of tea. We may not love finance, we may hate banking, but we absolutely love our sports. We love the things that we collect, whether it's NFL or NBA or cricket or soccer. And so you have many of the companies like Chillits, for example, is working with many of the football clubs, and this is not the American football, but the traditional football of soccer, in terms of trying to create this massive collectibles for the teams you support, for the players you support, for ability for you to capture those small excerpts that we're going on YouTube and have a sense of ownership around it. I think that's profound, and that's truly global. That while finance may hit 1 million people, out of 8 billion people, I think NFTs have the potential to hit majority of those people because we understand that space, we are comfortable with it. So I'm looking at the sophisticated services that are in the niche areas. What do we do with non-custodial finance, yield aggregation, protocol, type of elements? And what today we see as a DeFi support vertical, all these verticals are there because of legal issues, ramifications, financial world. And I like to compare that to what Josh mentioned, that you have price oracles and you have digital asset custody platforms and capital adequacy requirements, which is for the entrance of traditional finance into decentralized world. I believe that you have a similar adjacent support vertical that will prop up to adhere to things that Josh mentioned, the things in terms of providing some sort of a validation services or notary services, or providing even though it's meant to embed trust in these digital tokens, and as NFT give you the sense of ownership, which was non-existent in existing legal frameworks. I think in many cases, we begin to see what you see on the right-hand side as a vertical. That vertical is already emerging for the DeFi world, and I would take that it will morph into providing similar level of service to the NFT space. And I think that's an exciting area to be part of. I'll spend 5 more minutes and open for Q&A. This is all something that happened last year. And this is nothing to do with NFT, but this is to do with money, the money that we have in our wallets. So I'm not even talking about some exotic crypto assets that are in the place. This is all the regulation, all the companies who've jumped onto DeFi bandwagon, whether it's stablecoin, whether it's custody, or whether it's legal framework around how do you move money. And this has all happened last year. And the reason why I brought this up in comparison to NFT, that I expect something similar to happen in 2 years from now, to the example that Christoph gave with Sotheby's and Christie's and many of these sort of intermediaries who are directly impacted from art world to sports world to everything that we choose to collect. We will see a similar ecosystem emerging where there will be a massive adoption and making this easier, where no one really cares about key management of wallet. It should be as simple as you opening a PayPal account and keeping your all digital asset, not just payment asset, but also your fraction of your stocks, which is the vision of many of these companies, to create a wallet that becomes a universal custodian of all asset classes, not just payments. So I think that is where I would like to go with it. And again, I do want a distinction between bankable asset, non-bankable asset. What you see in non-bankable camp is where all NFT resides, right? And not just notional NFTs, but if Beeple owner would still want to retain some aspects of the Beeple art and simply want to collateralize the 1% of that, you should be able to do that with fractional ownership of that and be able to monetize that world. With that notion of fractionalizing it, physical art simply doesn't exist today. And tokenization makes all that possible. So immense possibility. I think I talked about this chart later on. We look into the traditional way of digital representation of asset value. And in this world, with crypto and with with DeFi, we've looked into traditional sense of cryptocurrency, security tokens, utility tokens, and you begin to now see other blobs coming around here with non-fungible tokens and various categories in non-fungible tokens where we look into collectibles, art, digital identity, healthcare records, and you'll find a whole new class of asset classes, which is what our discussion has been with healthcare companies and what we are discussing with the traditional, identity management entities who are in this notion of bringing identity to life. Institutional shift, and I'll give you an example before I open for Q&A. We begin to see the inclusion of institutional investments coming into the DeFi space. And I compare that because it took us almost 10 years to get here, but from here on, it'll be exponential, that if you have institutions who have learned to keep your assets safe, which is obfuscating the entire technical requirements of your key management and everything else, a token is a token is a token, right? And a token can represent asset class, a token can represent a stock, token can also represent an NFT. So if a institution can provide surrounding financial services, the ability for them to go after non-bankable asset is nothing but switching a framework and saying, we can keep your asset safe, we can provide lending and borrowing against it, we can provide collateral management against it, we can give you a legal framework that ascertains that ownership is preserved, and then you begin to see newer markets that emerge from that. And those new markets is where my focus is. My focus is not just from the romance of NFT and not romance of creating new business models, but what are those new markets? What is the financial opportunity and the innovation opportunity that we have to invest in the next Google and Baidu and Tencent and Amazon of this world? And that has not happened yet. So I will keep your eyes sort of open on that sort of front. And I'll give you one quick example. And I had 3 examples, given the time I have to cut short this a little bit. All these companies collectively represents about 90 billion to $1 trillion worth of transactions in this space. They didn't exist 4 or 5 years back. They weren't really major players. And so my question to all of us is to ponder upon what will this world look like for the NFT players? And will there be a common market for all NFT types because the token is a token? Or will there be a substrate of markets for digital art, as Christoph explained, and for sports? And in sports, you could have classification for different individual sports. Or you could have a massive, like in this case, you find that SEN, which is a Silvergate network, is an overlay which allows you to provide real-time liquidity to crypto assets, which was largely missing. And in 4 years, they become a dominant player, which no one really had heard of the name 4 years back. But they have become sort of the de facto standard to be able to move crypto and money with all those players within a matter of minutes, right? And this is an overlay on top of crypto agencies to be able to marry the traditional fiat or traditional banking and provide liquidity to that world. I'm envisioning something similar to prop up from the NFT space to see who are that space. Can I join the marketplace and sort of be able to have an exchange vehicle for me to exchange my NFTs, whether they're sports or whether they're art or whether they're my identity, and find a marketplace for me to be able to either lend, borrow, and do interesting things with it. And that's an untapped market that I think is there. And this is an example of real estate, which can also be an NFT as to, how does that converge? Because whether you have NFT and the non-fungible token, at some point, it has value, and the value has to equate to something, whether it's a Bitcoin, Ether, or USD. And we begin to see those flows sort of emerging in a meaningful way going forward. So with that, I would like to pause, given the time that we have, and just want to see if there are any questions that I'm happy to answer.
Perfect, Nitin. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I think Anna has a question which is related to your talk, and then we can open the floor for general questions. I will enable Anna to speak. Yeah, Hannah, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned that NFTs seem to be the killer app that for blockchain that we have finally been waiting for. And at the same time, NFTs have been set up, the standards on Ethereum have been set up in and activated in 2016, 2017. We had CryptoKitties explosion. So they have been technologically around for a while. So I would be interested in knowing your opinion about what other important factors actually activated this killer app.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Hannah, because that comes up a lot. That what makes the remaining parts. So there are a few things, right? One is, if you look at blockchain per se, and I'll draw an equation that things like blockchain and AI became more popular now because of economics of IT. So the accessibility to processing, accessibility to massive amounts of data and this massive pipes makes blockchain, because blockchain has cryptography and data replication technologies that are needed, possible now. Which means that if you had proposed blockchain for example, 20 years back, it would not be possible at the scale at which it's possible now. Similarly, if you look at CryptoKitties, they were NFTs in a way, but they didn't have the economic model around it. So if you look at ERC 721 or 1441, I think it's 1441, 1442, 1155, these specifications have come around for a few things. One is to have the ability to encompass all the things Josh mentioned. So if I'm an artist and I am allowing you to have 10 copies of my art, which is now possible with the subsequent framework that have emerged besides 721, allows me to retain ownership, but give you a fractional or sort of a lending element of it. That if you choose to sell that copy of that asset, I can still give you an avenue to get a kickback or provide the original artist's commission every transaction you make, which means I have a recursive sort of stream on the art that I sort of have the ownership to, but I also am sharing that ownership with the participants who have had limited copies of this digital art. But the general sense that anything that's digital can be copied is still true. So the question then becomes is how do you, and these protocols that have emerged after CryptoKitties, and CryptoKitties essentially brought Ethereum to its knees, which allowed NFTs to take a back step. Now it's come to a point where you have layer 2 solutions. This is my sharing of chart that I did with the layers of protocols. So layer 2 protocols have now emerged to solve the scalability and privacy preservation capabilities, which has lended itself to a substantial growth, not only from the adoption pattern perspective, but also giving the technical and business capabilities for these things to be consumed in a meaningful way. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll pause at that.
Thank you.
Does that make sense though, Hannah?
Yes, it does. So we basically pointed to other standards and not just the original 721. Right.
And then we can certainly, explore other, people are more educated now. They've seen, and I absolutely don't like Doge from what it does, but there's a hype around these things. There's a general understanding of how these things have evolved, massive monetization opportunities. So there's an education level too that was not there in CryptoKitties timeframe.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Nitin. There are two other questions in the Q&A. Hannah, I think you had another question for Christoph. Do you want to go ahead and ask?
Yeah, I can. So NFTs and smart contracts are generally complicated structures, and we keep saying that artists can gain from issuing NFTs, but that requires expertise. Since there are intermediaries, a lot of artists may not have technical expertise to set up their own smart contracts. So we rely on intermediaries. So how much room for abuse of, let's say, royalty payments there is if this honest intermediary is setting up the NFT on behalf of the artist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know, right? But I think what you do see is that there's already been stories of artists or people who want to create an NFT, mint an NFT, and they were surprised by some of the transaction costs, the gas fees or the minting costs or some other transaction costs. I think you'll definitely see this, right? That people start using templates, contracts from exchanges or other people from other intermediaries. There's definitely that danger, right? And I think there's definitely a danger of illiteracy, especially in this early phase, right? Where artists will say like, oh, I want to do an NFT, but then don't really understand what all the small print is. So I think it's a danger that this might happen. But there's not much, I mean, I don't know what more I can say at this stage. I mean, I do want to sort of link to your previous question. I think in terms of the emergence of the NFT market, I think it's always going to be very hard to think about a counterfactual world without COVID, right? And I think why I say that for the art market in particular is because as the pandemic started and then sort of lockdowns happened, I mean, the auction houses start to look, galleries, auction houses, art fairs, they all start to look for new business models. They really went all digital. And I think this has definitely, I mean, in my view, it has definitely opened their eyes for the possibilities of things like digital art, right? I mean, I think auction houses historically have always been a bit conservative. And I think that now the art market, the art world has really turned digital, and that may have opened their minds and eyes for NFTs. So I'm not saying that the sort of the COVID pandemic was sort of the driving force of the NFT boom, but I think it might have played a role in sort of accelerating this rise of, or this emergence of NFTs.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Let's have a last question from Hossein. I think this question is for Josh. And Hossein, you are able to talk now.
Thank you. So the question is whether this increased importance of these markets is going to basically lead at least major industrial countries to regulate these, and wouldn't this be kind of oxymoron that this decentralized system becomes suddenly highly regulated? And I expect actually legacy financial institutions start calling for more regulations as they lose more market share to these systems. So what are your thoughts on this?
I think twofold. The first is that we ought to expect them to become regulated very quickly. So one of the ironies sort of traditionally around internet governance is that any emerging technology is accompanied with this claim that law will somehow wither away. And so we can imagine back the Napster and BearShare days when we thought copyright was doomed online, and it certainly had its difficulties, but law evolved, and now we have the streaming and licensing models which are prevalent everywhere. And you can consider some of the gaming platforms where they said fraud is fun because it happens within a game, and so it's part of the game structure, and therefore there won't be real world law that intrudes. And it's been an ongoing kind of cyber anarchist claim that a new technology can free people from regulation. And so I do think that regulation in this space has evolved at stunning speed, especially around ICOs. There was sort of this brief moment where people thought they'd kind of managed a complete end run around the SEC, and it just turned out not to be the case. And similarly with the exchanges, there was this brief kind of growth of thinking, okay, here we can do what we want to do, and then there was the crackdown by FinCEN, and no, now you need a money transmitter license if you're going to exchange crypto for fiat currency. So I do think we're going to see evolution very, very quickly in this space. I'm not a rah fan of the regulatory agencies. They do know. There seems to be a broad sense that they're retaining the power to regulate, but they don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs yet. So, for example, the SEC under the Howey test is quite capable, I think, of taking almost any coin and calling it a security. But they haven't done that. And instead, they've sort of drawn the outer limit of their regulatory authority, and then they said, fine, but if you come inside here and you're doing interesting and novel things and you tell us what you're doing, including CFTC, for example, who have opened up sandbox programs to say, look, if you tell us what you're doing, we will offer you some degree of amnesty from whatever our regulatory framework is going forward. And I do think that there's a broad sense within the community that they don't want to kill off valuable ways of transacting business, especially of eliminating costly intermediaries and so on. So while I don't think that the promise of kind of cyber libertarianism attached to these technologies was ever going to come to fruition, it's the thing that sort of new excited people who get into this technology think kind of every time, and it just has never yet come to fruition. I do think that there's serious space to evolve here that is going to be given, if not freedom from regulation, at least a free hand by regulators. And then the second part of your question was, what do I think legacy financial institutions are going to do? In some sense, they're fighting with their backs to the wall. DTCC is regularly sending around. That's the company that does settlement for stocks. they're sending around white papers saying cryptocurrency and decentralized ledgers are super scary, and they're also trying to develop. And there's this recent crop over the past, I'd say, 3 years. We've seen a heavy crop of permissioned blockchains. So we might take a look at the Symbiont model, right, where people are attempting to put personal property mortgages and stocks and other smart financial instruments on a blockchain. And they've partnered with the government, and they've tried to get past this difficulty that government can stand in the way because of all these vested interests. So for example, with personal property mortgages, real property mortgages, you would have the recording offices, which have plenty of people who live there and who draw a paycheck from recording each one of these mortgages in the big brown leather bound books that are in the basement of the county courthouse. And we've seen partnerships where the filing offices become mining nodes, become verification nodes. So there are ways in which these permissioned blockchains are trying to, or rather these legacy institutions are trying to use permissioned blockchains to fend off the challenge and maintain their position, especially when it comes to things like check settlement or transfer of personal property mortgages or transfers of stocks. That they're fighting for it by adopting the technology. And I think long-term, there's at least a chance that some of the emerging solutions are going to be permissioned. I think that there's enough legacy heat there, and these networks are like any other network, right? That they follow the law of the more people use it, the more valuable they become. And so if you've got all the major players using it, then the network is going to have a real advantage. As for calling for extra regulation, I think so. You see a little bit of an example of that, for example, with the crackdown on money transmitter licenses, where the big companies realized, it's a couple $1 million to get a money transmitter license in all 50 states. Almost none of the exchanges could manage to do that. So you had a couple of players in big banks that thought, hey, this is our way to force this competitor out. But it didn't work, right? I mean, in the end, Coinbase and a few other people did pull together the money. They got the money transmitter licenses and they opened business, and they had the trust of the community. And so in the end, that sort of regulatory fend-off didn't work, but it does pose a real threat to new entrants to the field. Not everybody can do a Coinbase, not everybody can manage that, and it did cause the center of cryptocurrency trading to exist outside of the United States, and maybe still does for a substantial period of time.
Thank you. So we are slightly running out of time. So I see another question by Arash Alush. Arash, I think it would be great if you could reach out to Nitin and ask this question. Actually, Nitin had to jump off due to a call with one of the clients at IBM, but you're welcome to reach out to him. Before I conclude, I would like to make two announcements. First of all, I want to remind all of you that there will be the Tokenomics 2021 conference, which is being organized by Hanna Laburda, and the conference will be on November 18-19 this year, and the submission deadline is August 15. So please, consider submitting your best work to the conference. The website is also up and running, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to Hanna for more details. So this is like the third edition after two very successful conferences held in Paris in 2019 and the Toulouse School of Economics virtually in 2020. And this conference in 2021 will also be held virtually. And the second announcement I want to make is that there will be a summer break. So the CBER Forum will be on a break in the months of July and August, and the regular schedule will resume in September. So please stay tuned. Further announcement will be communicated towards the end of the summer. And if you have any question, you're always welcome to reach out to the CBER Forum and ask for details about future events. With that said, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the speakers again. I think it was a very, very interesting panel, very interesting symposium with a lot of interactions and a lot of participation from the audience. I think I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure that most of the people here also had an opportunity to learn more about NFT. So thanks again, Josh, Christoph, and Nitin. We'll be in touch, and stay tuned for future communication on NFT. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.